Let's head north of the border up to Canada, shall we, where we've been covering Canadian dictator Justin Trudeau. His administration from the outset has been clamping down on personal freedoms since he took office. And there's been a lot of slippage, right? This has been happening under his regime for quite a while, and he's continuing to take away personal freedoms. This all came, of course, to a head during the winter when Canada's truckers were told to get the vaccine or else they wouldn't be able to cross borders in order to do their jobs. So
or deliver any goods and services, right?
Right. So they revolted, right? They said, no thanks. And it was really a moment, right? We see now how that reverberated across the world, the Canadian truckers. The government took their bank accounts. If you set up a GoFundMe page to help support any of them, those were taken down. GoFundMe stepped in thanks to the Canadian government. Like, it was crazy. Social media accounts, fake propaganda from the government. This was Justin Trudeau's government that did all of this. Trudeau told us, of course, that it was all due to science that we were putting these vaccine mandates in place. It was all science, right? We're going to listen to the science.
Every time we saw him speak out about these mandates when he was facing pressure about them, he said, I'm not even going to talk to anyone who's not following the science, right? We're following the science. That's why we're doing these things. And so we don't even want to abide or hear anyone who's doing anything but, right?
Yeah.
But a new lawsuit shows us that, in fact, they had no science when they were making rules. They made the rules and then waited around for some science that was convenient for them.
I'm going to try that around the house. I'm going to make some rules, and then I'm going to just wait for, I don't know, I'm going to wait for science.
You know what? I can't put Eve to bed anymore because I have, my doctor said it's bad for my back.
Yes.
Oh, when did you go to the doctor? I'm going to. I will be.
I'm going to find a medical journal that says, putting my kids to bed at night is bad for me.
It's bad for my anxiety.
Right.
And I can find a doctor to say that, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to find the science. I'm going to do just like Justin Trudeau and find the science. So here was Justin Trudeau, just a little flashback, talking specifically about why there's this push for vaccines and how, like, you need to be a good Canadian. You need to fall in line because the science is there. Listen.
There are Canadians who still continue to choose to not get vaccinated. It's fellow Canadians as well. When people are seeing cancer treatments and elective surgeries put off because beds are filled with people who chose not to get vaccinated, they're frustrated. When people see that we're in lockdowns or serious public health restrictions right now because the risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people get angry. And we have put forward many, many different measures to encourage, to reassure, to incentivize, to educate, to cajole, to remind people that it's never too late to do the right thing. It's never too late to go and get your first dose of vaccine. I can tell you that frontline health worker who's giving you your first dose of the vaccine, even now in January 2022, will be immensely pleased to be able to give you that first dose of vaccine even today. Because they'd much rather be giving you an injection of vaccine than intubating you in an ICU.
Yeah. The gray zone. Max Blumenthal has some excellent reporting about Nicaragua and the differences here and why they were able to have chemo treatments, deal with cancer, deal with heart patients, totally unrelated to COVID and their hospitals. Why? Because they didn't close down. They didn't lock down. And by the way, the mandates, lockdowns led to this these nut cases. That's why we had this, right?
These delays which are still in place. In fact, one of our mutual friends, Amber MacArthur, has been talking about how
she's in Canada. Yeah,
she's in Canada. She's a Canadian journalist and had a mammogram, which required some follow-up procedures that are timely, and she still can't get in until the late fall. I mean, it's August, right?
Crypto Nation says the intubation was the problem all along. Yes, exactly. Read Peter McCullough's great book. I had him on the show. We did a redacted conversation. It's available on Rumble. We couldn't even play it here on YouTube. It's a full hour-long discussion with Peter McCullough. Go to our Rumble channel and watch that interview. And the intubation is the problem. You're absolutely right. So not just truckers, of course, were all in all this. Trudeau demanded all federal government employees would be subject to a vaccine mandate. Further, he said no later than the end of October, he said at the time. A vaccine mandate for travelers would also be implemented. Again, all in the name of science, he said. We're following the science at every turn. And if you don't believe in vaccine mandates, then you're a racist, he told Canadians in French. Listen.
Oui, on va s'en sortir de cette pandémie par la vaccination. Puis on en connaît tous des gens qui sont en train d'hésiter un petit peu. On va continuer d'essayer de les convaincre. Mais il y a aussi des gens qui sont farouchement opposés à la vaccination.
Qui sont extrémistes.
Qui croient pas dans la science, qui sont souvent misogynes, souvent racistes aussi. C'est un petit groupe, mais qui prend de la place. Et là, il faut faire un choix en tant que leader, en tant que pays. Est-ce qu'on tolère ces gens-là ou est-ce qu'on dit, voyons, la plupart des gens, presque 80% des Québécois ont fait ce qu'il fallait faire, se sont fait vacciner, on veut revenir aux choses qu'on aime faire. C'est pas ces gens-là qui vont nous bloquer maintenant.
Yeah. So they're racist.
So we
They're
as a government, do we
extremists.
tolerate these people?
These
Do we,
racists.
like-
What does that have to do with getting... You're racist because you don't want to get a vaccine?
I don't know.
I mean, this is the kind of craziness. You throw this around, it's ridiculous. Well, now, thanks to this big lawsuit, the truth is being revealed. Journalist Rupa Subramanya broke this story on Barry Weiss's Common Sense publication. She's done some amazing reporting on this. Do you want to kind of go through some of the main points here?
Okay, so two Canadian men decided that they did not want to receive the COVID vaccine, and they were both really upset for the travel mandates that said that you could not travel in and out of Canada without a vaccine. One of them is British and said he couldn't go and see his mother. Neither of them had any kind of real losses about it, but they both felt so passionately that this was a removal of their rights that they felt like this would only be solved through litigation. So what they did was they sued the Canadian government for the mandates that were put in place. And through this lawsuit, they've been able to see exactly what happened and how the government came up with these decisions to put mandates in place. So some things that have come up in the case you might see is that, do we have the screen that I shot for?
Well, let's set this up with Rupa because
Okay.
I want to give her due. Anytime we have a good journalist who is independent, who's doing great work, I want to highlight her work. And so this is Rupa explaining a little bit of this lawsuit in a little bit more detail here. Listen to Rupa.
On August 2nd, I broke a story for Barry Weiss's Common Sense where I report on recently released court documents relating to a case challenging the federal travel vaccine mandate. These documents make it abundantly clear that the mandate was not motivated by the science.
So it wasn't motivated by the science. And let's meet one of the individuals before we get to your full screens here. One of the plaintiffs, Carl Harrison, 58 years old, he said he and his partner Emma had emigrated in 2009 from Britain to Canada. He was stunned to watch politicians just reading off of prepared talking points during this hearing. Like he was sitting there, and for days they had to do this cross-examination. So when the lawyers were asking the politicians about the science, and the vax, they were literally reading off prepared remarks, and he kept 30 questions just to get one answer. They just kept reading from these cards and just these talking points over and over again, these BS talking points. And he describes the scientists sitting there finally getting to speak for the first time, felt like a weight had been lifted off these scientists' shoulders. Listen to him.
Just on this, but the politicians like Jennifer Little and the others, Evasive, trying to use talking points rather than answers. And like we watched Sam, probably use 20 questions or 30 questions to actually get to an answer. And you probably read that when the same talking point that, and Jennifer Little was obviously very well schooled in that. And you see that through all levels of the Liberal government. You see that in Parliament, people reading from cards, talking points that are pre-written as answers to questions that they expect to get. Disappointment, but no surprises with the political witnesses. Some elements of frankness amongst the scientists where you could sense maybe some of them were getting something off their chest under oath.
Yeah.
I don't blame them.
Interesting. That's a very interesting comment.
Yeah, it is to hear that these politicians just reading from prepared remarks prepared by the Trudeau government on how to handle this question, right?
But when you dig into what actually took place as the mandates were being discussed by the people who had the power to implement them, and who those people were and how they came about these decisions, it's quite shocking. So a couple of things that the court documents include that were discovered in this lawsuit. First of all, that no one in the COVID recovery unit, including Jennifer Little, who he just mentioned, who was one of the main decision makers about the vaccine mandates for travel, had any formal education in epidemiology, medicine, or public health. Okay.
Okay.
That's not awesome. Little, who had an undergraduate degree in literature from the University of Toronto, testified that there were 20 people in the unit. And when she was pushed, they said, well, did any of them have professional experience in public health? She said there was one person who was a civil servant who briefly worked for a public health agency of Canada. She wasn't a doctor or at all. They said that she was... so anyway, this person did confirm that she was that she was not a doctor, but was on that team. Let's see, the term cabinet confidence, the fourth bullet down, is noteworthy because it refers to the prime minister's cabinet, meaning that Little could not talk about who had directed the COVID recovery unit to impose this travel mandate. So, they're using a lot of sort of governmental protection, but when there were emails that came out between Little and some of the other people inside this COVID recovery unit, this email came out where this woman, let's see, Lumi Mailari, is an official in the Public Health Agency of Canada. And this email exchange, she seems to be casting about for a credible rationale for the travel mandate. So she says this is less than 2 weeks before the mandate was set to kick in. And she writes this email and says, to the extent that updated data exists or that there is clear evidence of the safety benefit of vaccination on the user or other stakeholder of the transportation system, it'd be helpful to assist Transport Canada for supporting its measures, meaning we need some data to prove that this is actually going to help people. So we're going to do it. Can anyone give us some science behind why to do it, right? 4 days later, on October 22nd, McCrory emailed again saying, our requirements come in on October 30th, just over a week, so need something fairly soon. We're looking for science to validate this mandate we are about to impose on an entire country. Anybody? Bueller?
No.
Bueller?
Of course, this is exactly what they did in the United States as well, right? I mean, this sort of massaging of public policy to sort of fit your government's moves to try to clamp down and consolidate power and to take people off the streets. Closing businesses, forcing mandates on people. We still see these mandates. Lloyd Austin, by the way, this is a good question, right? The Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, got COVID a second time last night, right? Mm-hmm. Here's a guy who literally is forcing people out of a job because they won't get vaccines.
Yeah.
The CDC changes its guidelines yesterday, right? So that vaccinated and unvaccinated are now treated the same, according to the CDC. Good question, right? Lloyd Austin, second round of COVID, all these people fired in the military.
And discharged without honors, meaning they don't get their pension. Those people should get their pension.
Right.
Now,
can you smell a lawsuit?
Let's circle back around to that.
Again, maybe we'll start to see a massive lawsuit. And I would hope like there's like some massive class action lawsuit that can maybe come together and force their hand.
It's equivalent to all the non-violent drug offenders, the marijuana offenders that are still in prisons. Like they tend to like not understand what that's done to their entire life. Like these people's lives were changed because of this, and we never end up going back and taking care of those people. It's like, we already screwed them. We'll deal with the future. Let's just leave them. They're like the collateral damage.
Well, Tulsi Gabbard asked Kamala Harris about that during a debate. Remember that? When Kamala Harris, Tulsi Gabbard ripped her apart. This was probably the moment that she lost the race.
So good.
And she said, all of the people who are put away for many, many years because of a marijuana offense, right? And you prosecuted those and went to great lengths to keep those people behind bars. And then you laughed about and talked about when you openly used marijuana, and you laughed about it as if it's just a side joke. Is it a joke to the people that are locked up for many, many years? You take away their livelihoods. I mean, we can draw sort of like a metaphor for what's happened with COVID for these people. But again, come back to these tale of two different countries where you have a country like Nicaragua. And again, just watch Max Blumenthal's reporting on this about a country that was left open and people were able to get chemo treatments. They were able to see their family. And the opposite is the case in Canada.
Yeah.
And freedom.
Well, and I even used the Amish. We showed that Amish video, or I showed you, where the Amish community, they let it go in. They didn't vaccinate. They didn't social distance. They spent time with their loved ones, and they reached herd immunity, and it was all good. Like they were just, their lives did not even change due to this.
Yeah.